Hello and welcome to Thought Atlas. I'm alone this week, so probably gonna be a shorter video. I am entertaining growing some facial hair, so it's gonna be a little bit rough. So just minimize the video. It's gonna be a talking head kind of deal. I don't have anything to bring up today on the screen. I'm gonna be talking about Roe v Wade a little bit, but I'm gonna start out with a history of sort of my view on the subject. Now, I was raised in Catholic school, and uh, for a while I went to Catholic school. I went to the YMCA, and then I went to Catholic school for like preschool and kindergarten. Then I went to public school for first through third grade, and then I went to Catholic school for fourth through eighth grade, then public school for ninth through 12th grade, and then I went to a private college that had nothing to do with religion. And so, despite all that, I didn't end up being particularly religious. And on the subject of abortion, I never really had strong feelings either way. And I sort of settled for a very long time on the position of, well, not my choice, right? And it's only been in recent years that I've decided to sort of revisit it because I've had some friends and family members kind of push me on, like, well, what do you really think? Like, you have to take a side. And, uh, or claiming rather than saying that's a little bit wrong. They haven't pushed me to be like you have to take a side, but rather they've tried to claim me to one side or another. And more as I've thought about it, I've rested on a pro-life position, but not the pro-life position you might expect, because despite this sort of like Catholic background, um, I don't bring religion into it. Instead, I look at this as really an issue over individual rights, and you have to look at what constitutes an individual, because most people are like, oh, my body, my choice, or privacy, or whatever. But you have two sides arguing this from a position of like, well, you can't do it because Jesus, or my body, my choice. But those two arguments aren't counter arguments to each other. And so what you have to then, I think, do is you have to find the point of common contention. And it seems to be in what defines an individual, right? And so we're a country that allegedly believes in individual rights. And so when I start to look there, I look at this situation like, okay, if you're a scientist, right? They always say trust the science. Trust the science. You have the way you determine, or one of the ways you determine what like the individual of a species is something that has its own unique genetic information that is easily identifiable as part of that species. And that might seem like a weird way to put it, but it's because of things like, when you have like individual like fungi cells or bacteria or whatever, right? Uh, and there's all kinds of like symbiotic and parasitic creatures that are genetically unique but not independent. So that's where like independence doesn't come in. And that, by no means am I trying to make like the Rothbard, I think it was, argument that, well, like the fetus is like some kind of parasite. No, I think that essentially, if you're going to be very strict about defining a human, as soon as you have sort of your own unique genetic information, you are a human of your own. Now, you could start to argue, well, but does that constitute an individual? And the problem is that everything kind of beyond that point becomes somewhat subjective, right? And so you have some people that say, well, it's a heartbeat, or it's like when they can feel pain, or when they can live their own like rational existence, or like when they can survive outside the womb, and all that. And each of those has like sort of the counter arguments. If it's like, well, if they can survive without help, or survive outside the womb, you're sort of saying that like someone's humanity is contingent on their ability to survive without external help. And so you're saying, well, like, if you start to try to apply that to other situations, like somebody in a coma, or somebody who's on life support, it's like saying, well, that person's less of a human because they aren't able to survive on their own. And you're like, well, no, we would never do that. And it's like, well, then why are we doing it in this case? Like, would a coma patient, could you just shoot them? Well, no, they could recover. Well, like, this unborn child has potential to be a human as well. So like the coma patient has some sort of lived experience, and they have the potential to recover. So you're like, okay, well, they're safe. Well, again, this unborn child or has a potential to be a person, obviously. And so when you look at that from that perspective, you start to see that some of these arguments fall apart, and you're like, well, what about like rape or something? Well, you're like, well, why is it that you haven't just created two victims? Why is it that, like, oh, well, it's okay in this circumstance? Like, what is the context make it acceptable? Like, what if somebody didn't have an abortion and they're born and they're the product of rape, and then, like, does that make them less of a person? Again, I don't see the consistency in the logic here. And when you look at sort of the left, I don't know why they're completely resting on, we just have to have this whole abortion thing. Like, all 50 states have safe haven laws where you can abandon a child as long as it's unharmed, usually at like a fire station or a hospital or sometimes multiple places. And so, like, adoption, or rather putting them into like an adoption program, is not difficult. There's not like a lot of legal loopholes to jump through. There's not crime associated with it. It's very simple, right? And so, well, what about like healthcare costs? Well, it's not hard to find like charities that will help women, especially in the case where they've been raped or assaulted or something, to take care of those costs, right? And if you're from like a Democrat position, I don't understand why they're not saying, like, let's put more money into foster care, let's put more money into these sorts of programs that take care of children. Like, they want to do this sort of free healthcare thing, which I'm against, but from their perspective, why isn't their argument, well, why don't we start with like free healthcare for like expectant mothers or something, right? You would think that could be their position. And so I've never really fully understood why it has to be abortion, especially since we're getting better and better with like prenatal support and being able to remove like an unwanted child unharmed and then bring them to term without the mother's involvement. And then of course, there's like all the men's rights people that are like, well, why am I on the hook for this if I would have aborted it? But like, it's not inside of me, so I don't get a say in the matter. Well, how is that equal protection under the law? Or you could look at the non-aggression principle, right? Like, if someone's pregnant and you don't take an action, then how is it that abortion is acceptable because it requires an action in order to prevent the pregnancy from coming to term? And so there's just argument after argument that makes it very difficult for me to see a logically, not emotionally consistent supported position on the left. And most of these arguments I've come up with on my own, and I've since starting to come up with them, I've heard people, and I'm not like taking credit for this or anything, but I've started to hear some of these arguments in Discord chat rooms and in other places that I tend to hang out, coming from other people. And there are a lot of positions that, like, I thought of on my own a couple years ago, which tells me either one, I am somehow strangely prolific in getting my idea out there, or these are logically sound positions because multiple people are arriving at them without any help from each other. And it's pretty much the way I see it. Is just, it doesn't seem like it's necessary. It seems like we have the science and the resources to not have to do it. Like, the Constitution really doesn't define what an individual it is, and it probably should, because that, I feel, above all other things, is the primary contention in this situation. And I mean, that's really all I've got. I'm sure there's something I left out. If you have any questions or comments or objections, leave them down below. In terms of like the Roe V Wade thing, I guess I can expand on that a little bit, in that some of the counter arguments that I've heard, other than sort of like throwaway, like right wing, uh, when I say that, I don't mean to disparage them. What I mean is that some people are just like, oh, it was terrible. But if you ask them why it was terrible, they're like, cool, because they're like killing babies or something. And you're like, well, that's not much of an argument. Like, it is a position, but it's not an argument. But some of the actual arguments, I think, that like bring new information to the table are that like the decision in Roe v. Wade was essentially legislating from the bench, which in the new leaked documents is a lot of the opposition to it. It's not saying that the they're not. I mean, I haven't read through it. It's 90 pages long, and it's not the final. Maybe I will when the final comes out. But from what I understand, from what I've heard from people, is that a lot of the opposition to the Roe v. Wade ruling and wanting to overturn it comes from the idea that it was just judicial malpractice. Not that the result of that ruling is wrong, but rather the what the ruling caused was wrong. And so it'll be really interesting going forward, seeing what the different states do. It seems like there's some interesting, probably public battles going to come out of this with protests. And we've seen, this is one of the issues where we've seen both the left and the right get violent over. I mean, the left has been getting violent in their protests for a little while now, but in the past, it hasn't been unheard of for right-wing activists to go out and burn down or vandalize abortion clinics. So it could get spicy over the summer. Like, COVID's kind of going away, and not looking forward to that, but I'm sure if it happens, we'll cover it. And so there you go. All right. I hope that gets you guys happy. Maybe a short video for once. According to my record thing, it's about 12 minutes long. Probably going to start up Twitter and all that soon. We're getting our Discord server ready for people to be able to join it. So if you're interested in joining, maybe leave a comment and I'll try to reach out to you somehow or reply to you when the link goes live. All right, well, that's about it. See you later.